You know what, I sent in the, based on your recommendation. You know, you brought it up that in some places curb and gutter may not be.
Right, I remember you did bring that up.
Well, and I've sent a memo.
Good afternoon.
And because I pointed out.
Congress. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order today of the Salina City Planning Commission. First item on our agenda would be approval of the summary minutes of our last meeting, August 16th. Is there any discussion?
Move to approve?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from our last meeting. All in favor? Aye, please.
Aye.
Any opposed? Meetings are approved.
Just
Yes,
in
sir.
reference to your minutes, I would add that the item of import on your minutes was the subdivision regulation amendment dealing with perimeter streets, and that was adopted by the governing body per your recommendation. So
Excellent.
that has now been adopted as a city ordinance amendment.
Excellent. Well, then moving on, there's no public hearing item tonight. We'll start with administrative items. Our first is number 4.1, application Z08-9A, which is filed by Randy Pinnick on behalf of Salina Hospitality, LLC, requesting approval of a final development plan for a Fairfield Inn and Suites Hotel. This would be located at 2455 Virginia Drive.
Don't think we have any planning commissioners who were on the commission at that time, but back in 2008, the planning commission reviewed a development proposal at the southwest quadrant of Magnolia Road and I-135. And at that time, a group called Magnolia Development Partners expressed interest in developing that site with retail stores, restaurants, and a lumber yard home improvement center. The primary anchor that came forward for the development was a Menards store, and this was done as a planned commercial district, and Menards was the only identified tenant. So as part of the Planning Commission's review, they reviewed both a preliminary plat and a rezoning request for this parcel, and because it was a planned commercial district, the Planning Commission also reviewed the development plan for the Menard site, which is platted as Lot 4. And on November 4th, 2008, you had a public hearing on that request and recommended that this property be annexed into the city, the south 9 acres, that it become a planned commercial district, and that the plat of the property proposing 3 commercial lots be approved. One of those conditions is highlighted on page 3 of your reports, and that is that a final site development plan and final landscape plan for each individual building site in the Magnolia Commons addition shall be approved by the Planning Commission prior to issuance of any building permits for these sites. So this is coming before you for that reason, and in January of 2014, Magnolia Development Partners submitted an application to split off a 2.04 acre tract in the southwest corner of Lot 1, and that 2.04 acre tract is highlighted there in the at that corner, outlined in blue there. And the plan was to set that aside as a future hotel site. After the lot split was approved, Salina Hospitality LLC purchased that property, and in August of this year, Mr. Randy Pinnick submitted plans and an application for final development plan approval on behalf of Salina Hospitality LLC, and they're requesting that the Planning Commission approve their plans. And I would note there that I have described it as an 82-room Fairfield Inn and Suites Hotel. The revised plans that we received reduces that number to 77 rooms. So instead of 82 rooms, as noted in the report, it's actually a 77-room hotel. The plans call for a 13,600 square foot, 3-story hotel building with parking on 3 sides. And so Salina Hospitality has retained Kyle Valley Engineering to prepare civil plans for the project, and Wolf and Associates Architecture has been retained to develop design plans for the building. And so most of our focus is going to be on the site plan, the grading and dimension plans, the landscape and utility plans. The architect has also submitted floor plans and exterior elevations depicting the design, color, materials, and exterior appearance of the building. Your role today in reviewing these plans is to determine whether you think the plans as submitted conform with the parking, signage, and landscaping regulations of the city, as well as the development standards of the planned C5 district. So we've kind of outlined and summarized for you the basic requirements of the C5 district. Some of those that we will highlight is that there's a maximum structure height in the C5 district of 50 feet. There is a requirement that all access drives, parking areas, and sidewalks be paved with asphalt or concrete. There is a requirement that front yard landscaping be provided. In terms of the building orientation, as you look at this plan, at the bottom of the screen is east, and that is facing I-135. So the orientation on this drawing is Virginia Drive is at the top of the image, and the to the left is Virginia Court, and to the bottom is vacant property, but it is oriented to face I-135. The building would be 230 feet long north-south and 56 feet wide east-west. The setbacks are 33 feet from Virginia Drive and 100 feet from Virginia Court. As you can see, there's paved parking areas on 3 sides of the building, and we also have a 50-foot landscape strip or buffer along the north side between the parking area and the abutting property to the north. As we reviewed this, the total site coverage would be 56%, meaning that building and paving would cover 56% of the lot, and 44% would be left in some form of green space. The building is designed such that it would have cut stone material around the exterior of the base, with a variety of colors and textures of dry-bit stucco above. So the view that you're seeing here at the bottom would be looking towards the east, towards I-135, and again that would be on the opposite side away from Virginia Drive. And so the plans show a steel frame porte-cochere on the front side with a stone support. There is a plan for an indoor pool with an outdoor patio on the back side. Most of the roof height would be 32 feet, but there is a 42-foot portion in the center to accommodate the elevator tower. And there's also a decorative wood trellis that's proposed on top of the roof over the main hotel entrance. So part of your role in the overall site plan is to determine whether this building design demonstrates a high-quality visual appearance and would be compatible with Menards and other development in the Magnolia Commons addition. On page 8, we discuss parking, and I've already made the caveat that the revised plan we received reduces the number of guest rooms from 82 to 77, and so the required number of parking spaces is 77, because there's no restaurant, there's no conference or convention space as part of this motel, so the only parking that has to be provided is for the guest rooms. Would also point out that there are public sidewalks that will be constructed along Virginia Drive and Virginia Court frontages to this property. The fire department has reviewed the plans and determined they have adequate access to all points of the building, and the fire department requested, and it has been added to the plans, that an additional fire hydrant be installed northwest of the building along Virginia Drive. Dustin, if you could go back to the overall aerial photo. There is a stormwater detention pond that is northeast of Menards at the end of Virginia Court on the north side there. That stormwater detention pond collects the runoff from this entire development. It is sized to accommodate full development of Magnolia Commons, and so that detention pond will accommodate the runoff from this property. We did want to note that this site exceeds 1 acre in size, and therefore a notice of intent permit from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment must be issued before there's any land disturbance on the site. We did look at front yard landscaping, and I believe we have that in the slideshow, Dustin. The landscape provides over and above the minimum amount of green space in the front yard along Virginia Drive and Virginia Court. It's almost double what the minimum requirement would be. There's extensive landscaping around the entire building and site, but our focus in the landscape ordinance is on the front yard, and they are providing the 14 tree units that are required to be located within the front setback area. And so in addition to the front yard trees, there are a total of 182 additional shrubs and 4 additional shade trees that are proposed throughout the site. The other thing that we look at is islands, and this property does provide islands within the parking lot, and they've set aside about 8% of the parking lot area for green space islands within the parking lot, and so that exceeds the 5% minimum requirement on our ordinance. The only thing that we have as a site issue, and this would be familiar to you, for those of you that remember our review of the site development plan for Casey's General Store, but the only thing we identified on the site plan was that the proposed fenced-in trash enclosure at the west end of the south parking area is located within the front yard setback area, and so they would have a couple options to deal with that. One would be to relocate it out of the front setback area, and because they do have 6 parking spaces over and above the minimum requirement, they could actually lose a couple spaces and reorient the trash enclosure, which is right in that location, and relocate that out of the front setback along Virginia Drive. They also have the alternative of submitting an application to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a setback variance. If you recall, in the case of Casey's, they also had their front a trash enclosure fenced in the front yard setback. They did apply for a variance, but ultimately relocated the trash enclosure out of the front yard and did not end up requesting a variance. And we do believe there are alternative locations we could work with the applicant on to find for that trash enclosure area. Generally, in the final site development plans, a sign package is part of that and is part of the Planning Commission's review. In this case, the only signs that we're seeing as part of the submittal are wall signs, and those proposed wall signs do fall within the limits allowed by the sign regulations. There's no freestanding pole signs shown on the plans, and we can't tell you whether that's because there's no pole sign proposed or because it hasn't been thought through at this point. But the provisions of the Magnolia Commons Edition would allow this site to have one pole sign, not to exceed 150 square feet, and not to exceed 30 feet in height. So absent showing that on the plan, they would still have the ability to request at a later time installation of that pole sign, so we wanted to share that with you. The process is for staff to review the site plan to determine compliance with city ordinances, regulations, and policies. We have done that, and the only thing we found not to be in compliance is the location of the fenced-in trash enclosure. Your job is to review the plan to see if it demonstrates a satisfactory quality of design and compatibility with other uses and structures in the neighborhood. And so we have identified your alternatives as to approve the plan as submitted, approve it subject to certain revisions or conditions, deny the site plan as submitted, citing your reasons for that, or postpone consideration if you think there's a need for additional information. We do believe that the plans submitted conform with the development standards established for Magnolia Commons, and we would recommend approval of this plan. And we've identified 8 conditions on page 11 of your report. And the most important of those we wanted to point out are, the first one is that you cannot approve the location of the fenced-in trash enclosure in the front yard. That could be done through a variance, or they could relocate that out of the front setback. And then the other thing we wanted to point out was we made reference to the design engineers of Cobb Valley to provide a stub off the 12-inch water line on Virginia Drive. What they have done is brought in a fairly lengthy stub coming in off the 12-inch line and put a hydrant right at this corner. And so condition 2 highlights the fact that if they do that, then that would be a long enough run that would have to be designed as a public water line and located in an easement. If they just put a short stub off the 12-inch line and locate it in an existing easement, which is right here, then there would not be a need for them to design it to a city standard or to place it in a separate easement. So that will be a design choice for the applicant's engineer. Item 3 reminds them that they do need to get a notice of intent permit from KDHE prior to land disturbance. Condition number 4 reinforces that public sidewalks need to be installed on Virginia Drive and Virginia Court. Condition number 5 sets out the limits of the sign. And then number 6 deals with making sure that we don't have any light pattern that's going to have light spill on adjacent properties. And number 7 is a standard condition that what you are seeing today is what gets built as far as a building permit. So with that, I'd be happy to address any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there questions for staff?
Yes, Dean, is there a site plan, proposed site plan for the rest of that property in the commons?
There was only the conceptual plan. There is a plat. So what we have is there is a lot over here that fronts on the interstate, and that the Planning Commission granted a frontage exception for that to allow an access easement here to provide access for that. This is one large 12-acre lot, and it's already been split one time, so there is no, this is the conceptual plan. The conceptual plan is the plat layout. There were 3 commercial lots, and it's essentially turned into 4 with this lot split right here.
Why I ask is where that hump is right now, on the eastern edge of that.
Out in here.
Yes. If some business were to come in and build a 30-foot tall building, it would basically obstruct the view of the whole hotel.
The purpose of that hump, and the same thing was done over in the Lowe's development, is that many developers, particularly commercial developers, view that material which was excavated out of the pond as valuable. So essentially they store it on site, and then most likely when there are other users who come in to develop on here or here, they're going to borrow that dirt, and the pile will be eliminated because they will import that fill and use it to help develop the pad for whatever building that might go in there. So that material was what was removed from the detention pond, and rather than hauling it off, they've kept it on site to have it available to build up pads for future development. The same thing was done south of Lowe's, where they excavated that pond, and then they kept the material on site because they find that to be valuable. Instead of hauling it off and then having to import dirt back, they retain it on site for future use.
Well, my point being is that a building could be built there, not necessarily on the hump, but that would obstruct the view from the interstate on that location. And is that maybe not a concern for the planning commission, but maybe a concern for the developer?
Well, it's the developer's hump, and he put it there for the future storage of that. The other thing about that is that nothing in the way of development can occur there without the planning commission's approval, and I doubt very much whether the planning commission would approve a plan that leaves that there. So you will have the discretion to determine what happens on the balance of this property, because the plans for this and the plans for this over here will have to come before the planning commission before anything is built there.
Other questions?
Just one about the possibility of a pole sign. A business, not this one particularly, but any business, is limited to one pole sign, even if that pole sign is located off-site. And I guess I'm looking at whether there ever would be a signage closer to I-35.
There could be the possibility for that, but that would also have to be approved by, that would have to come back before you for approval. So what is allowed today is a pole sign that's on this property, and the Menard sign is on a different property, and it's part of a sign easement that was granted. And so in order for Fairfield Inn to have an off-premise sign, they would have to get approval from Magnolia Development Partners, and that plan would have to come back before you before it could be put up. But what you are authorizing today is a 30-foot tall pole sign located within this 2.04-acre site.
Thank you.
Other questions? Is the applicant here? Would you like to address this, please? I'm sure we have some questions for you. Just state your name and address, please.
Name is Randy Penick, and I'm from Belton, Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Penning. Is there anything you want to say?
The only thing I would add is the comments on the trash enclosure can easily be relocated to which would be the northeast corner of the parking lot, and be out of that frontage without having any issues.
We thought perhaps over in here.
I think we would rather have it down
in
there. That way it's a straight access off of Virginia Court and then a straight out to Virginia Drive.
Yeah, if we're correct, isn't the only food prep area on the site is right in here?
Yeah, but you got the sidewalk access to the parking lot around, and either way you go, there's gonna be foot travel to get to there. So the location of it in that other corner is only by convenience, and the convenience for the truck coming in and out for the long term of the parking would be much better suited in that other corner.
And the other thing that we were speaking of was there's a 12-inch line that runs down Virginia Drive here. The Director of Utilities and Fire Marshal would be satisfied if there was just a short stub put off and the hydrant was put here in the existing 10-foot easement. This plan from Caw Valley shows a longer run over to here, which is certainly acceptable. It's just that this piece right here would have to be built to a city public line standard, and then this would have to be dedicated as an easement.
Right,
Again, that could all certainly be done, but if you so chose, you could shorten that run and just put the hydrant there.
We would definitely opt for the latter to go ahead and change that. I think that was just a design opinion of where that fire hydrant should be when they conceptualized that.
So anything that's in that northwest quadrant for the building would be acceptable for the fire department. So we just wanted to make sure that was known, that was a discretionary design item.
So if I understand you correctly, Dina, the fire department thinks that either location is going to meet any emergency, any fire emergency, right?
They have identified the need for an additional, there's a hydrant south of this building, but they have identified one to get coverage to all the building, to have it northwest here, and if it was here or here would be equal in the eyes of the fire department. It was a design decision from the engineer to bring a stub off of there and locate it here, but that is not, I just want to make, that's not because we said it had to be here. They would have a choice to have it here as well as here. And then, Randy, we had a question about, are there any thoughts about a pole sign and where that might be located?
Right now, the thoughts of a pole sign on that lot haven't been fully conceptualized to take advantage of it, because you got the building itself would be taller than the pole sign in the location that it's at. We've got a 40-foot tall frontage of that building that has signage on it that faces the highway. That would give more advertising than the 30-foot pole sign. I think what we would be looking at is probably a marquee sign that's somewhere around 12 feet tall on Virginia Drive to just be an added entrance signage. I'm not going to say that we wouldn't consider the option of putting a 30-foot pole sign in, but right now, where that would fit best on the lot without causing any type of detraction from the building, we haven't come up to a good solution yet.
So our main point was, absent any other information, if they came in with a plan for a pole sign not exceeding 30 feet in height, we would simply issue a permit for that. If it was something that was dramatically different, that it would come back to you for your review.
Any
So-
other questions?
Mr. Pennick, I'm curious, and it really, I think, addresses Commissioner Baffa's, I don't know whether you call it concerns, but questions. Does the motel development, that you're specifically in charge of the motel, not any other part of the lot? Am I getting that right?
Okay, you mean
Any of the rest of the adjoining land, are you?
No, we don't have
anything to do with that?
That's the Magnolia development. That's not ours. We purchased this divided tract of land, the 2.1 acres from them.
Magnolia
So
Development Partner still owns the balance of the land.
So I'm not asking you to engage in hearsay, but I'm sort of curious. I am supposing that the height of the overpass also adds to the visibility of the sign in the front. Higher up, they can see it more easily. Yes?
You would be correct, but where the location of this lot is with the building and the overpass, the distance away from it really doesn't cause it to be a distraction,
Right.
because any traffic flowing from the north to the south would not be able to see that building or a pole sign until they're basically past that intersection anyway.
Okay. Yeah. So, again, I'm not asking you to indulge in hearsay, but do you have any idea what they conceive as other development in front of that hotel, essentially?
I have no idea, because we're
Yeah.
not part of the Magnolia Court.
Okay, thank you. Just curious.
Well, but are you concerned, though, that a building might block the view of that building?
No, we're not concerned with that at all.
Any other questions?
I don't have a question, just a comment. I appreciate all the extra green space and the trees.
Definitely.
I'm one who always looks for, and especially in the summer, in a parking lot, I always look for the trees where I can park. So I appreciate all that.
And I appreciate the interest in planting a lot of native plants with some minor exceptions, and the more the native plant species that you plant, better off for the environment.
Really, we didn't have anything to do with it. That's all the designer.
Good for him.
We just think you do everything. Is there anything
for
you
the
want to
record.
comment on?
Or her.
No, we just look forward to having another successful hotel property in the town, in the city. So we're excited to get moving and get construction going and
Just-
get it open by the
Just
end of
for
next
the
year.
benefit of the planning commission, this is the same group that did Holiday Inn Express on Diamond Drive and also the new Holiday Inn out by Lowe's. So this is the same group that did those two projects.
Thank you, Mr. Pinnick. It's a beautiful building and a welcome addition to our city.
Thanks. Other questions?
I don't believe so. Thank you. Any other discussion or questions for staff while we're here?
Yeah, I apologize, Mr. Pennick. I did have one question. It's just more a matter of information. It talks about indoor pool with outdoor patio. That indoor pool doesn't extend out into the patio area? Yeah, I thought that was the case. I just wanted to be sure.
So when you drive down Virginia Drive, you will see the outdoor patio area, but the pool will be enclosed under the roof line of the building. So
And why was the number of rooms reduced?
they would have to speak to that. It was my mistake where I was looking at an earlier version of the plans that had 82 rooms, and the most recent version had 77, and that was a slight design modification.
I thought you instituted that.
No, it was my miscounting of rooms. So.
Any other discussion? Thoughts?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
are you ready for motion?
Certainly.
I move that we approve application Z08-9A as submitted with the 8 staff recommendations as outlined by Dean and also as written on page 11 of our report.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve application number Z08-98 with the 8 staff, I'm sorry? Sorry. Number Z08-9A, along with the 8 recommendations by staff. Any discussion? No? All those in favor, vote aye, please.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Motion passes. Thank you, sir.
Just for your benefit, staff uses the A's and B's and C's to keep all these straight as for the separate lots in
As
the
the
same
school
development.
principals.
I thought C was classified.
Yeah, right.
There's one item on the agenda,
I'll tell
A,
you
B,
that.
C, whichever it is, we have approved it.
Should I nominate you to be vice chairman?
Open to that.
And that leaves us with our annual business meeting. A year's gone by already, apparently.
We've had a year fly by since your last September meeting, and the primary change that has occurred is that Mr. Kennedy's 2 3-year terms have terminated, and he was replaced by Greg Linkowitz, who some of you have had an opportunity to meet. And
Welcome.
then Andre Smata was reappointed as our youth member. And so we are having as our first item of business the election of chairman and vice chairman. And Mr. Freiberger served as the chairman the past year, and he is eligible for another term. All current members, except for Mr. Linkowitz, are eligible for the position of chairman. You have to serve a full year's term before you're eligible to be an officer. Mr. Kennedy was our vice chairman, and he's no longer on the commission. And so all members except Mr. Linkowitz are eligible for that position as well. So the first order of business would be to consider nominations for the position of chairman for the upcoming year.
I would like to nominate Owen Freiberger for chairman. I move the nomination cease.
Second.
Second.
And I move that he's elected by acclamation.
Second that.
Do we need a second on that?
With the second of that motion, there's no reason for a vote because it's being done by acclamation. So by acclamation, Mr. Freiberger has been appointed to serve another term.
Appointed,
you.
appointed,
Thank
or,
you.
or appointed or railroaded? Let's see. Which would be?
Well, let's just say he did not
He did not object.
He did not object.
All right.
Well, it's been a fabulous year, so I look forward to another year. I appreciate your confidence.
I move that Dave Norland be nominated as vice chairman.
Second.
Move the nomination cease. Move that we elect David Norland as vice chairman by acclamation.
There's a second for that. Then the commission has appointed Mr. Norland as vice chairman by acclamation.
Does that mean that I get to confer with Mr. Andrew on all the vice?
I leave that to you.
All right. All right.
Any of you are welcome to confer or call or do anything either prior to getting your packet or after your packet if there are things that you think require clarification or further discussion. So I have not had a whole number of meetings with Mr. Freiberger. We just have a general understanding the way the agenda and meeting's going to flow, and so we have observed that. But we are certainly, staff is available any time between meetings or before meetings to discuss or answer questions, anything that is of interest to commission members and not just the chairman or vice chairman. So whether you're vice chairman or chairman or a member, we're certainly available for questions and consultation. Our next item is Mr. Freiberger served as your liaison or representative on the Board of Zoning Appeals, and he is eligible for another term on the board. The Board of Zoning Appeals meets the third Thursday of each month. September, they're meeting next Thursday on the 15th. The Board of Zoning Appeals has membership of 7, and one of those 7 each year is a liaison or representative who's also a planning commissioner. So we generally accept volunteers. We also accept nominations. So as I noted, Mr. Freiberger served as your representative this past year, and he can share with you whether he found that enlightening or beneficial.
It's enlightening and beneficial, but it doesn't meet very often. So in the beginning it meant a lot, and then suddenly it dried up. I think that's kudos to our development staff because obviously we don't need that step if planning is done well. I've seen people not then need to go to that level of inquiry. So I encourage you, if you're interested in the zoning board, to do that. I'm more than happy to step aside and let someone assume that. If not, I'll be glad to continue.
I would move that we nominate Owen Freiberger to the BZA.
I'd
right.
I'm on the county board of zoning appeals.
I would be more than happy to do it.
So if Mr. Freiberger is volunteering to serve in that capacity, then we don't necessarily need a vote to appoint him. And then the second is whether we have any volunteers who would like to take Mr. Kennedy's place, who was the liaison to the Salina Heritage Commission. And that is a local preservation board. They have quarterly meetings, but they also have special meetings that are called to review filed applications. And so we don't have a fixed schedule other than those 4 meetings, but if we get a request, I think the last meeting we had, they had 5 different agenda items, which was probably the most that we've had in years, but sometimes they are demolitions, sometimes they are modifications to proposed modifications to a historic structure. If you've driven by the former St. John's Hospital, there was a 1-story wing along Ash Street, and that request for demolition of that specific wing went before the Heritage Commission, and so that is a typical item that they would be looking at. And then we have 3 historic districts, and if somebody's making a modification to a property within a historic district, that is reviewed by the Heritage Commission. Anything that affects a national or state registered property. So again, Mr. Kennedy was your representative. He is no longer on the Planning Commission, and so of the 7-member commission, at least one of those needs to be a representative who serves on the Planning Commission as well.
Volunteers? It's very important, and I think it will be more important in the near future. We're seeing many more people want to resettle in that particular area of town, and the questions are just, there's a plethora of questions and a lot of issues. So I encourage someone to step up to this one.
Anybody interested?
I think you would do well. Definitely. Beauty is important. I understood that as a...
Yeah, that was so sotto voce that I almost didn't hear it. But yeah, I nominate Dan Boffa to the Heritage Commission.
It was a suggestion and a nomination and a...
Thank you.
Excellent.
So we have a motion and a second to appoint Mr. Baffa. So should we... Baffa. So we should have a... is there full support among the commission to vote in favor for that?
Yes. Aye.
It appears to be a unanimous vote. So that concludes the annual business meeting portion of the meeting. We do have, we are in search of one member who lives outside but within 3 miles of the city limits. So we have 2 of our 9 members, one of which is Joan Jackson. The other one was Mr. Kusick. So if you are aware of somebody who lives just outside the city limits and might be interested in serving on the Planning Commission, then encourage them to submit an expression of interest. The reason that we didn't have anybody appointed for Mr. Kusick's spot is that there were no expressions of interest received from anyone who was outside but within 3 miles of the city limits. So if you're aware of someone, please encourage them to submit an expression of interest. And then the only thing I have for you under other matters is I hope you will read through the information there on our legislative update. The primary theme that we wanted to communicate there, and it's been a challenge for staff to keep up with all the, I will call them, preemption activities of the Kansas legislature, but they have taken a number of recent actions which can only be described as designed and intended to preempt the ability of local governments to deal with issues that they normally would deal with. And so every community of size in the state of Kansas has sign regulations, and those sign regulations, as we've discussed and we'll be discussing at your next meeting, deal with temporary signs, and political signs are just one subset of the set of temporary type signs, and the legislature has seen fit to wade into that area as opposed to letting cities and counties regulate that as they traditionally have. The other area they have waded into is wireless telecommunications siting, and there are a number of preemption measures in there which are going to require us to consider changes to our existing ordinance. And with the Commission's consent and approval, we would like authorization to bring those wireless communication facility changes back in at least a summary of what those identified changes would be at your September 20th meeting. And Aaron Martin with the City Attorney's Office, who helped us draft and assisted you with our review of the DAS facilities. As you might recall, he is actively involved in trying to go through and identify the necessary changes that we would need to make to our current ordinance. But if I could summarize our current, the undercurrent of our ordinance we have for wireless communication facilities is that they encourage co-location and discourage the proliferation of towers. They encourage the sharing of facilities, and what has been done by the legislature undoes a great deal of that, because they are going in and carving out basically areas that they're saying that local governments they're taking away the ability to regulate those things. So we would like to use your next agenda, the 20th, to bring those back and kind of summarize those. The other things that we would bring to your attention, Salina has never had what would be referred to as inclusionary zoning, but inclusionary zoning is in the case especially of multifamily or mixed use development. There are a number of communities who have required as a condition of, say, a planned development district approval that a certain number of housing units be set aside for a certain income level or affordability quotient, and the legislature has enacted a statute that prohibits cities from doing that. And so that was identified. I think they also adopted a provision, I think, that was intended to preclude cities from adopting minimum wage requirements, but that's not altogether clear. They did pass a legislation that precludes cities from adopting or enforcing a residential licensing program that requires inspections, and they have clarified that cities cannot prohibit or regulate canvassing or door-to-door campaigning or canvassing or distribution of literature. They have expanded the definition of harassment to include a course of conduct that's carried out through the use of drones over neighboring properties. So you cannot harass your neighbors by launching drones over their property. And then the other thing, I think there was an article in the paper, but again, the city licenses, regulates, does background checks on licensed taxi cab services, but the legislature has adopted a statute that deals with licensing, regulating or licensing the Uber-like ride services, and it precludes cities from regulating or licensing them. And then the other thing that we noted was that there was a statute first passed that said that cities could not treat licensed firearm dealers any differently than they do any other commercial enterprise. And then they decided that didn't go far enough, so in 2015 they amended that to prohibit cities from adopting or enforcing any ordinance or regulation or administering any permit requirements relating to the sale, purchase, or storage of firearms or ammunition. So in other words, if you wanted to have a secondhand clothing store and put that in a residential zoning district, that would be prohibited because retail sales are not permitted in residential districts. You couldn't have an antique shop in a residential home or residential district, but you can have a gun shop because the legislature has precluded the local governments from being able to regulate that. So we just wanted to bring those items to your attention, but that does seem to be a theme, at least recently, that we have to keep track of as a city staff. And in some cases, it makes us have to go back and amend our local ordinances because we're exercising authority that the legislature has taken away from us. So, as to the political signs, the city attorney is working on an official opinion as to what that statute means and how it would be administered locally, and he plans to submit that in writing to both the Planning Commission and City Commission. So we'll, sometime during the month of September, we will update you on the city attorney's interpretation of the new political sign statute. So with that, we do plan to meet on the 20th, and we will talk about temporary signs some more, and we will talk about wireless communication facilities both on private property and in the right-of-way.
May I make a comment relative to that? I hadn't planned on doing this, but I'm going to say it anyway. House Bill 2183, which is the political signs, and House Bill 2558, which is the soliciting thing. I think both of those are terrifically self-serving by our legislature. The other ones I may not like, but I really don't see them as being so self-serving. Both of those were passed specifically for the legislature and the members of the legislature because they have to get elected. And so they've gone about saying that, well, we can put our signs wherever we want, and we are going to be able to go and knock on people's doors and leave literature in their screen doors and in their mailboxes unrestrained. And I find that distasteful, and I think Dean showed a great deal of restraint in talking about this, but I think that's distasteful. I'm very excited about the fact that there's some conversation on the political sign one that may make it unconstitutional. And I hope an organization has the wherewithal and the desire to take the legislature to task for that. As far as the soliciting, I'm very curious to see how that will play out for gated communities and communities that have covenants that already specifically make it illegal for any soliciting to go on. And it's interesting, they didn't say anybody can solicit, only people who solicit with political campaigns. And so that's my little rant for the political system. I think they're running loose and wild, and they need to be brought in.
Like robocalls too. Politicians are exempt.
Our observation is that the state of Kansas has had a long tradition of home rule, meaning that communities have a great deal of discretion to regulate their own affairs, and the trend here recently has been to take away some of those home rule authorities. And so we will try to continue to monitor those, but it's been a lot busier to monitor than it has in the recent past. So.
Dean, I wanted to ask you about something, and this is, I hope not by way of passing along gossip, but a report from the county commission meeting said that Monty Shadwick would be meeting with the Salina County Planning Commission to discuss home occupations. I'm seeing that language about retail shops that take up the establishment in residences. I'm not certain that that's what that means, but this report said that he was going to meet this evening at 5 o'clock, and it's 5 till now, in room 107, the City County Building. Perhaps erroneous information, but we're in room 107, right? Double check. County's not meeting here, correct?
The regular meeting time for the Salina County Planning Commission is the first Monday of the month.
Yeah.
And since that was Labor Day, they moved it to the first Tuesday of the month, which is today. And so they are planning to have a study session on home occupations within the county.
Here.
Yes.
In 5 minutes.
Yes. Under the anticipation that we will complete our business by 5 o'clock.
Well, we can accommodate them, I suppose, but we want to hear more about this home occupation business.
Well, it only deals with home occupations outside the city limits, and their rules are a little bit more liberal than ours because they don't have the residential density that we do. So,
I have a question, Dean, on wireless telecommunications. What is the city's stance now on putting antennas on top of the water towers?
our stance is that the city does not allow that, and because the director of utilities believes it's a liability and maintenance problem, and it's not altogether clear whether this preempts our ability to continue to do that or not. But it does, the other thing it does is it gets involved in the negotiations between school districts and wireless communication providers and the city of Salina and wireless communications providers in a way that it never did before. So it even interjects itself into lease rates and those types of things. And in the past, it's if they work out an agreement with the school district to have a tower at the Central High Stadium, and what they negotiate for a lease and all that is their business, but the legislature has interjected themselves into that as well. So.
And I want to say, as a welcoming comment to Commissioner Linkowitz, welcome, Greg, to our body. But just a word of warning, given the duration of the last meeting on this subject, you might want to pack a lunch.
It must have been a year ago because everyone was new.
It was, yeah. I'm half joking. We don't know about that.
The good news is we're not going to be dealing with specific locations. We're just dealing with general rules of application to both wireless facilities on private property and wireless facilities located within the right-of-way.
And last year they didn't provide beer afterwards, so we were on our own about that. So, yeah.
We did give you pizza for the Kansas Wesleyan case. That did not set a precedent.
That's right.
Anything else?
No, our goal was to adjourn by 5 o'clock today, so I believe we have fulfilled that.
We have done it. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And again.